Assalamu alaikum, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Oaktree Institute podcast. We're very honored and excited to have a good friend of mine, influential figure in the Muslim community, with us today, Brother Wadud Hassan. Brother Wadud, how are you doing?
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Thank you for having me, Rami. Alhamdulillah, I'm doing well.
Absolutely my privilege, my honor. It was great catching up before we recorded this. You've been so instrumental, mashallah, a mindfulness and emotional intelligence expert in the Muslim community. Your background is in leadership and organizational performance. You've done so many different work and so many different projects. So I'm very, very excited to have you on and pick your brain on a lot of different concepts. I'd love to start. You know, your so many different projects you have going on as not just a father and a husband, but so many entrepreneurial projects. Tell us a little bit about the work you have going on and what you're doing nowadays.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. Exactly right. No, yeah, it seems like a bunch of things going on and how I'm balancing all that. So my focus, however, is, like how to take this mindfulness-based, self-development program that we have, this self-transformation program that we have now, alhamdulillah, for the Muslim community, how to take that to the ummah. How the journey started, I personally come from an education background. I was a principal of a few different schools. I helped launch a few schools from scratch. I did my principal's training at Harvard. I went for my graduate studies at Vanderbilt, and I did my graduate studies in leadership and organizational performance. But, while at Vanderbilt, I was actually developing a business plan to bring something to the market where I've seen like a huge gap. Like as a principal, as an educator, I saw that there was a huge gap on how we're teaching kids about academics, which is important, but we're not really going deep in kind of like teaching them about emotional life skills, teaching them about emotional intelligence. We're not teaching them about character in a deep way. I remember as a school, like you just have a theme in the morning assembly, you say hadith, like if it's Islamic school, or even in SEL, social emotional learning, in really good private schools, there are sessions where you're kind of doing some projects and things of that nature. But I wanted to take it deeper, and I wanted to create an entire curriculum for teaching kids about character in a very hands-on way. How can we have like brain and behavioral science of like what happens to your brain when you're grateful? How do you bring gratitude? What are some ways that you can actually build new habit and break old habits? So bringing kind of like the science behind behavioral coaching into this projects for kids, and that was kind of like my motivation to create something for kids in an after school or weekend school type of a fashion. That's how my journey started in this whole mindfulness, emotional intelligence thing. My graduate studies was in leadership, and we studied a few dozen theories on leadership. And one of the things that's, really stuck with me was there's so much evidence-based research, by studying human brain or human heart or human body, and how are we responding to becoming more mindful or grateful, or what does meaning and purpose do to our health or our longevity or our, happiness score. And this was really fascinating to me. And I was like, this is something that we really need to bring in this whole, character development, character training realm. And especially, as a Muslim, I was, of course, initially the plan was not just for our own community, for everyone, but for Muslim community, as a passionate Muslim, you definitely want to bring like, okay, I'm so, encouraged by the character of our beloved Prophet ﷺ, that I was sent to perfect the human character. And if that was one of his mission, how can we also kind of really go deep in that mission? And that was kind of like my own faith-based inspiration to try to bring it to our community. So that's how the journey started. And it took me to a place where, a year into the kids program, started realizing that kids are doing 6 weeks programming on gratitude, and having these beautiful projects and all that. But then they're going home, right? Who is going to be the role model for them? Who is going to reinforce some of these things with them? Who is going to show them, how to continue on that journey? You never fully graduate in that journey, right? It's more about being on the journey. Like our teachers and scholars teach us that you're never going to know if you have ikhlas or not, if you're going to have sincerity or not. It's going to be a journey, like you're always going to be wondering, like, am I sincere? You're going to have to keep striving and keep making effort and keep being on that journey. And it's not about the destination. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take you to the destination by his mercy and not by your good deeds, right? So that was what we started looking at, like, this is a journey, and that journey needs to be equipped by people that are going to be role models to these kids. And those are our teachers and our parents and our educators, our leaders. So we took all the research we did like hundreds of pages of curriculum. We started kind of shifting that into adult content, and we created an entire course. We created kind of like a masterclass and we called it, become a character coach, and started, coaching and teaching and doing classes with like youth leaders and, community leaders, teachers. And mostly because of my education background, I had a bunch of principals and teachers from, a bunch of different schools from around the country. Last year, we were invited as a keynote to train 30 plus schools at the Islamic Schools League Leadership Retreat, training them on like, how can we become more self-aware, be more mindful in the way that we transform our own character. And we model that for our kids to transform them as well. So this is basically in a nutshell, my journey into mindfulness. I'm focusing a lot on, adult training and development, personal and professional transformation through mindfulness in the mainstream market, but also a lot of work we have done in reviving kind of like a lost art and science of mindfulness from Islamic, psychologists like Ghazali's work or Ibn Atallah's work or Imam Balkhi's work on how do we incorporate this emotional, spiritual resilience, mindfulness, character development in making, getting to our best selves or journeying to our best selves. That was a long answer to your short question.
I love it. No, it's absolutely amazing. So I know you, and I know some of the background things you've done, but I think it's an amazing journey, and you've essentially captured the entire adult development within your mashallah, amazing but short career. Like, you've captured all the different components, and I love the idea of transforming character. Like at the core of it, that's what it is, whether it's with youngsters, youth, adults, like it's that concept of transformation. So I wanted to, and by the way, my kids went to one of the most creative kids programs I've ever seen in the Muslim community, right? Define 360 for social, unemotional intelligence and emotional learning. Such an important part of it. So let's break things down for the audience a little bit. So we've been saying words like mindfulness, like emotional intelligence, right? I think a lot of times people they're buzzwords, but they don't know what they mean. So mindfulness is an aspect of emotional intelligence, right? So give us the framework that you have. What is, from the big to the small, what do these terms actually mean, and how do they fit into me as an individual?
Correct. Right. Yeah. So, mindfulness is very big right now in the neuroscience, kind of like the behavior science, research and modification and coaching in that industry. Because if you're not aware of, how you're listening, if you're not aware of what the other person is really saying, if you're not really mindful and you're not understanding what is behind those words someone's uttering, what are some emotions that are actually behind those words, and if you're not aware of what type of impact you're having by your actions, your deeds, your habits. If you're not aware as a person, you're not going to be, if you're not mindful as a person, you cannot be emotionally intelligent. You cannot even start to even build emotional intelligence, right? You can't even understand whether you have gratitude or not unless you understand that I actually complain a lot. I actually, I have a tendency to get back into, stay with my negativity or negative thoughts for a longer time. And so if you're not even aware,
self-awareness.
Yeah. So mindfulness,
self-awareness.
Yeah. So mindfulness, self-awareness is like one realm of it, but it's like, you're kind of being, from a spiritual perspective, it goes to a 3-dimension. 2-dimension is like the mind and body, what's happening in my mind, what's happening in my body, what's happening in my surrounding. You're just kind of learning about that so that you can then become the best leader. You can connect, you can improve yourself, the way you come across, the way you serve, the way you connect, and the way you also kind of serve other people. But when you go to a spiritual sense, when you bring Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in it, when you bring Islam in it, then we're going into the kind of like the holistic model. Like we're not just a body, we're a soul, with a body. We're not just a body, we're a soul, and we have a body. And so if we have a soul, and if that soul is connected to a heart, and then what is mindfulness? Then you bring Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in it, and it becomes complete, right? The Prophet said that taqwa is here in the heart. So the heart comes into kind of the picture. How do you then connect your heart and your mind and your soul? So it becomes 3-dimensional, and you start thinking about how do we then have this deep sense of awareness and mindfulness of God. So and that all of a sudden start taking us to a lot of different terminologies that we're kind of familiar, but maybe we're not fully experiencing. So for example, we're familiar with the term taqwa. We're familiar with the word taqwa, and taqwa is, Abdul Halim's translation, Oxford, is that he translates it as mindfulness of God, taqwa, لعلكم تتقون, so that you can be mindful of God. So that mindfulness and awareness of God, that deep relationship God, that wherever you are, God is with you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with you. He's watching, Ar-Raqib. He's there, always there for you. This is what fueled the Prophet ﷺ to always have this sense of, presence of God. And he reflected that presence of God in the way that he came across with people. He received from God and he gave it to people, right? So then this concept of taqwa is then very central to kind of the Islamic version of mindfulness, for example, right? Also the concept of ihsan. We've heard about ihsan, right? The hadith Jibril that, what is this? What is Islam? What is iman? And what is ihsan? And ihsan is you worship Allah ka'annaka tara, as if you can see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as if you can witness, as if you can be present with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So ihsan is this concept of witnessing God, feeling the presence of God as if you see him. And if you don't see him, at least you have this presence that he's there with you. He sees you. And that ihsan, and when you become muhsin, then all the promises of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is opened up for you. Throughout the Quran, Allah's promises are with the people that have taqwa. Allah's promises are with those people that are muhsinun, that have ihsan. And ihsan, it basically is, that level that we want. We want to live in this world, in the presence of Allah, because the way we live is the way we die. And the way we die is the way we are raised, right? We know the hadith. So if we live in the presence of God, we die in the presence of God. We are raised in the presence of God. And hopefully we'll be in the highest presence of the Prophet and God in Jannah. So mindfulness then is a very deep concept that is very central to our deen. It's just that, we know about those terminologies, but we don't know how to experience them.
Yes. So excellent. So I was going to say exactly that point. I love the framework. I mean, you're bringing together really the Islamic tradition and the Western research, right? There's so many parallels and overlaps and nuances to the way, Muslims see the world, and obviously the if you will, the West or Western world perceives life and how it is. But I wanted to ask you this, I think a lot of times as Muslims, there's this skepticism, I think when you think mindfulness, you think, oh, well, it's meditation. Are you telling me to meditate more? Are you telling me to khushu' and salah more? Like what is mindfulness? Just breaking it down.
Right.
That's mindfulness, both question. Of those things? How do I experience it?
Right. Exactly. No, that's a very good question. So of course, yeah. So, in the modern neuroscience behavioral coaching, when they talk about mindfulness, the central, tenet of training mindfulness is meditation. The central way they train you on mindfulness is like, okay, my mind is all over the place. There is a Harvard research, Daniel Gilbert, Matthew Killingsworth, put like a gadget on people, 2,250 people, and they monitored their activity, their productivity, they questioned them and they collected all the data, and they found that about 47% of the time their minds are not present in the moment. Their minds are all over the place, right? And they also found another really important, interesting thing, that when people are focused and their mind was there in their task, they're happier. And when their minds are scattered and all over the place, they were less happy. So happiness and well-being was connected to mindfulness. So then they're like, how do we then train people in mindfulness, right? And that's where this whole research comes in. And they found that there is a part of the brain called default mode network, that brain is responsible for ruminating thoughts and kind of just getting distracted. So how do you train that brain? And that
ruminating, if you can explain ruminating, I love that.
Ruminating, basically, you're just kind of like, your mind is, not on purpose, your mind is kind of getting away from what you need to be focusing on. You're getting into different types of thoughts. Sometimes, also not positive thoughts. Either your worries, and you were distracted. Allah takhafu wa la tahzanu, that verse, and our scholars explaining. These are light bulb moments for me. Like they explaining that do not worry about things you're leaving behind. When the angels come to take you to Jannah, they say, don't worry about things, that you're leaving behind, or don't worry about what's going to, don't be anxious about what's coming. Because Allah takhafu wa ta'ala, nahnu awliyaukum fil hayat ad-dunya. We were your companions. We'll be with you. Allah is there with you, and we're there to escort you, right? So this concept of worries, anxieties kind of residing not in the present moment. When you take a few deep breaths, and you make dhikr of Allah, all of a sudden you start feeling this sense of gratitude, sense of smile, sense of presence of Allah and healing. And this sakina, tranquility that we know comes with dhikr of Allah. for example, you're driving home from work and your mind is all over the place. There was a difficult email, there was a difficult conversation. Oh my God, I don't know how I'm going to finish this project. Your mind is either worried about something that might have happened or anxious about what's going to come. And, that's one type of a drive home. Another type of drive, like today, I'm just going to take a 3 deep breaths. Subhanallah bihamdihi, subhanakallah bihamdik. I'm leaving everything at work. Now I'm going to go home and I'm going to fully transition and be mindful of my family. But on the way, I'm going to have a mindful drive. And you start looking around and you're like, wow, the weather is so beautiful today. And I can feel the warmth of the sun on my skin. Subhanallah, beautiful day. And then in Texas, you were driving and like, oh, there's this beautiful bluebonnets on the side of the road. When did they plant all this? I didn't know they had yellow bluebonnets. And then all of a sudden you started smiling. You started saying Subhanallah or Alhamdulillah. You started making dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this mindfulness all of a sudden starts taking you to gratitude, taking you to this happy feeling. And that's why after every salah, what do we make dua? Allahumma a'inni ala dhikrika. And then what comes after? Wa shukrika. When you make dhikr of Allah, when you are mindful of Allah, the shukr will come. When you are la'allakum tattakun, what comes next? La'allakum tashkurun. That when you are mindful of God, your heart will open up for more. And this is what Imam Ghazali said. He said that mindfulness is like opening a window to the divine. You're opening your heart and you're creating an opening for Allah to receive more blessings from Allah subhanahu wa
ta'ala. I love it. That's an amazing concept of the presence in the moment without the anxieties of the past, the worries of the past or the anxieties of the future. Just the presence, right, is really there. And all these things train on it, right? So I think we don't understand Islamically, things are like dhikr is there, remembrance of Allah is there, salah is there. Like there's things there. We're not extracting the fruits of them, but they're there as mechanisms to use that improve.
Yeah, they're alhamdulillah. We have all the tools. It's just that we're not using those tools with full mindfulness, right? We don't have that full sense of mindfulness. And that's why I think it's really important to understand why mindfulness is such a big thing today in behavioral training. Why all the CEOs and companies and like Salesforce has their own kind of like entire mindfulness training. Google has it. And why are they doing this? And they have seen, employees' focus, productivity, connections, team relationships, empathy, all of these things go up when people are more mindful of what they're saying, how they're connecting,
I love it. So why? So I can understand at an individual level. I need you to tell us, Brother Wadud, why at an organizational level this is so important. So, I mean, I understand if I make my salah, okay, alhamdulillah, I'm feeling better. I'm more happy. I'm less stressed. But how is that translating? Why are organizations investing in this? Why is this important to organizational work? And particularly, I think framing it in the context of a lot of our Muslim organizations, institutions in the Muslim community, whether they're masjids or community centers or national organizations, whatever it might be, they might have never heard of this concept in an organizational paradigm before. Why is mindfulness important in an organizational framework?
Right. Yeah, one of the really important things about organizational and team success, right? One of the really groundbreaking studies that happened several years ago at Google about they collected so many different data sets to see which teams are most successful and most productive, and they had amazing employees and all their experience, number of years they've worked and all of those different things. But they found that even after crunching, dozens of different types of data sets, they found that one factor that made the most difference in the ways that teams were most productive or successful was, number one thing was psychological safety. The number one thing was psychological safety, that you feel safe around your team to lead and to take risk together and to care. That people care and people connect with you, they empathize with you, they listen, and they lead in a way that is most beneficial for your growth, but also the growth of the team. And they're going to have your back if you try your best to do the next best thing. And while doing that, you fail. So that one thing made the most difference. It was not, people's experience or how much, studies or background or any of that. It was psychological safety. So psychological safety does not happen, unless you're mindful, you're emotionally intelligent in the way that you talk to each other, you connect with each other, you do teamwork, you know.
Explain that a little bit more, if you don't mind. So even the concept of psychological safety might be foreign to a lot of leaders, right? To a lot of institutions, organizations. So psychological safety, let's talk about this. How do you have that, and why is mindfulness at the core of that, if you will?
Yeah. So for example, you know, you have a new masjid, right? And the community wants things in a certain way, right? But your team really understands and feels that, okay, there's few people that are maybe donating, they have certain ways of kind of trying to shift the organization. But when you go out and you talk to people, you realize that there's something that's missing in the community. There's some services that are missing that you don't have budget for. The donors, you know, priorities and all those things, but your communities, you know, they need that. Your community's future needs that. Your community's longevity needs that. And so at that point, you know, do you have a really strong, like, for example, a shura or a committee or leadership that are you able to take risks? Are you able to listen to each other even when they're, you know, coming up with something very different? And are you able to be emotionally intelligent in the way that you connect with each other, support each other in innovation, and even when people, you know, take risk or fail, you know, and do things together to try to change. So, you know, any change process requires a lot of empathy, vision, but also a lot of connection and a lot of, you know, mindful leadership of like, how do I connect with the community? How do I communicate? How do I empathize? But at the same time, how do I make sure that I have my own emotional, you know, all my emotions that are going to come up. All this, you know, I'm going to be attacked. People are going to say a lot of different things. How do I control and communicate despite all these challenges in a very emotional, intelligent way? So the reason that, you know, mindfulness and emotional intelligence is really important to this training of psychological safety is because emotions, you know, they show up in our body. They did a study in Finland, and they took 700 people, and they found that people express emotions in the same way, no matter where you're from. You know, they took people from different geographical area, and emotions show up in a certain way. Your happiness shows up in certain ways in your body. Anger shows up in a certain way. So when you pay attention to, you know, the science of emotions as they're arising, you're able to kind of understand and get at a granular level of understanding, okay, this is what's happening to me. This is the type of emotions that's coming to me. And how do I not speak from my ego and I regulate it before I get to a very emotional, you know, the rational part of the brain deactivates and emotional center of the brain takes over, you know? So it's a little bit of a long answer to your short question, but it's really important that the Prophet ﷺ, he had this really amazing way of connecting to people in a way that he was able to be emotionally present for people. He was able to emotionally listen to people even if they're different. He was able to ignore and know what battles to pick, right? When the Bedouin came and pulled his shawl so hard that it made a mark on his shoulder, and the companions started getting really upset, but they saw that by the time the Prophet turned around, he was smiling. So just think about it. Like if you break it down to matrix level, you know, as the bullets are coming, you know, you just like duck down and then you dodge the bullets. You have this granular level of understanding of when emotions are rising. And before they do, you can calm it down and activate the rational part, the spiritual centers of your heart as a Muslim, and the rational part of your brain to try to communicate, talk, lead, and, you know, move forward with that level of emotional intelligence.
I love it. Absolutely love it. So the question is, how do you get people in such a busy world with so much going on? Like you're balancing kids' schoolwork and 8 hours of work on a computer. So, and I think, and then you're communicating, and then you're volunteering with your messenger, you're volunteering with your organization. Maybe you're full-time with your organization. There's so many demands, so much going on. How are you supposed to create that mindfulness in those moments, right? Particularly when I'm about to speak to my teammate, or I'm about to manage, you know, give feedback to somebody. How am I supposed to? Am I just supposed to stop and make dhikr, Brother Wadud, in the moment, or how do I do this?
Yeah, how do you do this? So so take it out of mindfulness and do it. Think about it from a different context. Think about it as a physical fitness point of view. You're a father. You have to take care of your kids. You have to take care of your family. You have to go out and work. You have to go volunteer at the masjid. What do you need to do to keep yourself fit to be able to do all this? What do you need to do?
Generally, I think two things. It's health-wise, right? We're talking about health-wise.
Yeah.
I need to eat well, and I need to physically exercise.
Physically, yeah, keep physically fit, right?
Right.
So can you do it like right in the moments of doing those work and doing all those different things, or do you have to take some time out to train yourself?
No, I got to find the time in my schedule to be able to get up and stretch,
Right.
get up, take a walk, get up, go to the gym,
Yeah.
something like that.
See, this is the exact same concept with mindfulness. That mindfulness is to the mind what exercise is to the body. So if you don't take time out to practice mindfulness every day, then you're not training yourself to be at your calmer self. So the way it works from a neuroscience perspective is the concept of neuroplasticity. Whatever you practice, whatever you listen to, whatever you think, that's how you start to shift your brain. There was a time that people thought that adult brains cannot really, meaningfully change after a certain level, after a certain level of growth. But with neuroplasticity and the functional MRI scan and the whole behavioral science research in the last 20, 30, 40 years, we see that adults' brain can significantly change functionally. Like you can become more mindful just by training your brain, by doing something every day. Or you can develop gratitude by doing a practice every day. You can develop your patience muscle by, doing some practice every day. And you can basically not only functionally change your brain, but literally change the structure of the brain. They've seen that. They did a program at Harvard, 8 weeks of mindfulness program with executives, and they found that they literally saw increase in the gray matters in the brain, which is responsible for long-term memory retention. So you can change the structure of the brain, and you can change the functionalities of the brain by dedicated practice every day. And that's where this whole meditation comes in the neuroscience field. What do we have as Muslims? If we can have our mindful sit every morning after Fajr and after Maghrib for our adhkar, and we mindfully sit and we are really there when we are making dhikr of Allah, and we really replenish our heart, what are we doing? We're learning to focus in the moment. We're training our brain to be more focused. We're training our brain and our heart to be more calm. And if you didn't have that, then what would happen? What would happen if you missed Fajr one day? You and I would feel the difference, right? We'll feel the difference. I missed Fajr today. Absolutely. And then if the person that reads Quran every day, they'll know that I missed my Quran today. And this is why many of the scholars, when they used to sit after Fajr until Ishraq or Salatul Duha, and they would sit and they would make their adhkar and they'll sit and they'll really be in that moment, right? Making dhikr and finishing all the tasbih and all the adhkar. And people will say, why do you have so many things going on? Why do you make sure you do this every day? And we know this from many scholars, not just one, that they used to say, this is my spiritual breakfast. This is going to fuel me for the rest of the day. And this is what the entire concept of mindfulness. If you don't spiritually feed yourself, you're gonna take missteps. You're not gonna be your best self that day. You're gonna lose, whether it's your calmness, your focus, whether it's that channel you open between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? From a spiritual unseen level, but also from a training level. That if you didn't train that day, or if you keep missing your training days after days after days, then you're shifting yourself to the other side. But you keep training every day for a few minutes, just 10 minutes of just sitting and breathing and making dhikr of Allah, you're learning to calm your brain. And guess what? Because you're training it every day proactively, when the time comes, just like the people that donate blood, right? They're donating blood. And one day they went through a situation where they lost a lot of blood, but their body knew how to make it up real fast because they're, regular blood donors. So your body and your mind gets trained to be there in that moment, to be more ready to have gratitude because you've been training your gratitude muscle, to be more ready to be patient because you've been training your patience muscle. So it's basically this proactive training that we developed on practicing all of these different qualities by dedicating training time in it. From a neuroscience perspective, these are like, deep reflection, meditation, and work that you do, journaling, work that you do to take account of yourself, understand and be self-aware of your triggers and your, weaknesses, shortcomings, and try to overcome them habit-wise. But also you proactively build new habits, proactively build new, centers of attention to shift your brain.
Love it. Amazing. This wonderful research and wonderful blend of the Islamic frameworks and the research in psychology and neuroscience. What is the difficult part of this? Why are more people not able to do this? So is it just the fact that they don't get into that consistent habit building of doing mindfulness practice? Is there what have you noticed in your work with so many different, I'm sure children, we learn a lot too, or young people, and then adults. What have you learned through your experience in this, and what really is working for people, and what's really throwing them off?
It's just the simplicity of how simple it is, but at the same time how difficult it is. Like taking 30 minutes a day to go for your walk is so simple that people kind of take it for granted, right? They're like, okay, yeah, we know we have to go for a walk, forget it. I didn't do it today, I didn't do it for the last few months, I'll see when I get time next time. But it's proven that if you take those walks, if you go do your workout, this is going to help you physically, mentally, and so on, right? The same thing. Like, are you first and foremost, are you learning it, right? Like, first time when I learned to count my calories, like your wife would know, right? When it changed my life. I went to a weight loss program at Lifetime Fitness, and I just learned how to count my carbs, or how to. And before that, we used to just bake a whole tray of brownies, and then me and my wife would just have it all like while watching something, right? But now I could not have more than a brownie because I know how to count. I'm like, oh my god, like I cannot have more than this many calories. So first of all, learning how to do this, and second of all, committing a little bit of time every day to practice it.
So the awareness of it, and then
the awareness and the practice.
The awareness and the practice, and this is it's so simple. I mean, but really, people need to learn it. They need to understand what this does, and they, a lot of times we're just operating. We're on just.
It is nothing but the hadith of the Prophet that the most beloved actions of Allah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are the small actions that are consistent. Absolutely. It is nothing but just that. In terms of the entire, if I want to, wrap up and summarize every single thing in one hadith, this is it. That consistency will change everything.
Right. SubhanAllah. That's amazing. That's amazing. Can you tell us a little bit of the results you've seen? Like how people embrace these concepts, the work you've done, particularly with adults. I mean, I'm sure you've had a lot of success with kids and Islamic school. I mean, this is important all over because, as you mentioned, it's the core of behavioral change, right? Yeah. It's the core, like self-awareness, self-management is the core of behavioral change.
Yeah, it's a huge shift. So for example, what we do now is we do a poll before and after even the workshop ride in the same day. Before we used to do like, okay, there's a series we're doing a pre-assessment and post-assessment and where people have shifted, right? But now we do like 2 hours, 3 hours. Let's do it first thing in the morning. How are you arriving right now? And people are like, especially when I do it with like, teachers, they're like, COVID was a huge thing, right? With so much going on. And I do a lot of teachers and education training in that sector. And if I had a bunch of teachers showing up, they're overworked. They don't have time for planning. They're not paid well. They're transitioning. They're trying to take care of the kids, at the front line. Same thing with like nurses or anyone, that's kind of like in that front line. And you try to tell them, how are you arriving today? And you would see on your screen as the polls come in, right? That people are anxious and they're just like worried and they're just, they're not able to focus and they're not happy or they're feeling tired or exhausted. All of these would show up on my screen, right? And within 2-3 hours of sharing some content and doing some practices together where I kind of do like the Islamic version of mindfulness, kind of like meditation, contemplation, like the Muraqabah type of models that we developed, and it's nothing but just, incorporating some of that neuroscience with Islamic concept of, focusing on mindfulness, and right after that, I'll do another survey and say, how are you feeling now? And the polls would be completely different. Like I feel relaxed, calm, I feel hopeful, optimistic. And I have seen this over and over and over and over. And I've saved it from everybody I train. I save those, the polls that just see with a little bit of practice, how you can shift you can take control. You can shift your experience. You just have to take 10 minutes to do a practice. And this is the concept of even a mindful salah or mindful wudu. Our self-regulation module where we train on emotional regulation. One of the things I do is talk about Imam Ghazali's model of mindful wudu. How do we really settle down and have a mindful wudu? And we know that wudu is a form of kind of like self-regulation. When we're angry, we're supposed to go make wudu, right? Or we get in salah, put water on our face or stand for salah or things like that. And we stop in the middle of our kind of like take a break. Everybody go do a mindful wudu, and I even get them to even order like a stool to sit down on and even a mug, they can fill up. So there's no running water. They're doing it slowly. They're doing mindfully. They're making the du'as of every limb. And as they finish that wudu, then they come back and I tell them, what shifted? What happened in that 10 minutes? How do you feel now? That all the stress and difficulties you're going through, that wudu can completely refresh you just by that, few splash of water. You're feeling physically, you're supposed to not just get purified, but you're spiritually purified. And how do we know this? The Prophet said that even, sins are falling off from your fingernails. And sins are where? Where do sins live? On our body or on our soul? We're actually cleansing our soul. So you have a complete cleansing with just a mindful wudu. We're not doing anything new, but we're just kind of breathing life into these things, and that's really important because, even like khushu, like how do you have khushu? And Imam Ghazali says the first requirement for khushu is hudur al-qalb, presence of heart. But how do you get hudur? Your mind is all over the place. And Imam Ghazali gives you, not just Imam Ghazali, a host of scholars, teachers, even Sahaba, Abu Darda, and others that really, we have traditions that are narrated from how they sat and practice that, right? To get them to a state where Imam Ghazali is talking about, sit in a state where you look inward, bring this remembrance of Allah in your heart, and just for a few moments, forget about any other worries and thoughts and let go, and you just stay with that. And I did this with my kids, right? I just said, Alexa, set a timer for 3 minutes. And I said, for 3 minutes, we're only going to think about Allah and we're going to be silent. And if our mind wanders, we're going to bring it back. That's mindfulness, training your brain, And just for 3 minutes, we did that. And people say, oh my God, like I had all these thoughts and I have all these things that I'm thinking. How am I supposed to stick to this? But that training eventually gets you to brings your brain and your heart to a place where you're starting to be more mindful in your salah, in your dhikr. And then it changes you spiritually and emotionally.
Amazing. I love it. Absolutely. People don't. It's a muscle you build, right? Yeah. The more you do it, the more you practice it, the stronger you manage it, the more control you have on it, and again, so on and so forth, and all the things that it does. So that beautifully articulated and beautifully.
All of us that don't want to be on those masjid boards, right? All of us that don't want to be on the masjid boards anymore because we see all the politics and we see all this, a very unmindful way of communicating or talking, or very poor emotional regulation and empathy and compassion. Basically, very little prophetic, mindfulness and emotional intelligence in interpersonal relationships, emotional and social intelligence. What else is going to be the cure to that? Then you ask, like, how can organizations use that? Our leaders, if they're not trained on that, how are they going to lead? How are they going to bring change? So.
Yeah. I was going to say this is particularly important. I mean, you mentioned it earlier when you said, you can work with kids, but they're going to react. They're going to copy their parents. If you don't fix the leadership, the ones that set the standards and they set the bar, if you will. Yeah. If you don't fix that, if you don't fix the role models, you won't be able to fix. You won't be able to have that culture or that effect on others. So. This is so particularly important. Like I think people don't realize a lot of times we lash out in meetings, or you're lash out on an email, or you're lash out at your kids or your spouse. Like you're doing that because you're just for a moment losing the grip of managing yourself. At the end of the day, it's all about ourselves.
You're on autopilot.
Exactly.
You're on autopilot. If you don't turn off autopilot, you're not aware of what you're doing anymore. You're just getting carried away. Whoever and whatever is happening is just pulling you into different directions, and you're just going with it, And you said, don't people know, or do people not do anything about it? Yeah, there was a Gallup study that 70% leaders reported that they're not able to be attentive in meetings.
Absolutely.
But guess how many percentage of those people did anything about that? Only 2% did anything about that, right? Wow. So this is what it is. Like, we know that we can't really focus, we can't really lead, or we have all these conflicts. But we're not willing to spend, in our human resources, which was the most important prophetic, effort on the human heart, right? And his companions and the people. So that people building is, like, very well with what the work that you're doing, how important that is. And this is one of those things that really is needed. This is not the end all be all. This is not the only thing, but this is one of the very central way of training, very central things that should be part of all trainings.
I love it. Absolutely amazing. I really appreciate, first and foremost, I love which is amazing work, super important. You come at it from a very academic perspective, yet a very rich Islamic tradition perspective. And I think that infusion the West and the East, if you will, if we want to say it like that, is super important. A lot of, as you know, I know Wadud knows this, but there's Buddhist concepts or Eastern meditation. These concepts are so popular, and for some reason, Muslims have not been able to shift this, like be a part of this narrative where actually our tradition has a lot of solutions and a lot of, like I said, structural solutions. Like you have to step away for salah. You have to step away for, like, there's no way around it. And then there's just like spiritual solutions you mentioned, like being grateful and saying azkar and, things that are not obligatory structurally, like from a Islamic framework, but like there are things that we're asked to do and reflect on all the time, hadith du'as that people say. So I think this infusion is so important that we embrace it and we are able to amplify it. So I really, really appreciate that. I want people to know where they can follow you, what the work you're doing now, where can they can be
I'm
in
like
touch
you
with
said,
you.
you said initially when you're introducing me, you were saying, you said something. I'm not sure what word you use, but whatever word you use, I just wanted to say that I'm definitely not like very like out there, popular or anything like that. I don't really like social media. I try it from time to time, and I'm like, then I give up. Right now, I've deleted them. But so it's very difficult to follow me unless you really sign up for my courses through Define or through Productive Muslim and kind of be in a in one of our programs. I would say for now, a lot of our work, right this year, we have a very important partnership with Productive Muslim where we just launched our mindfulness masterclass. If you go to productivemuslim.com/mindfulness, you'll be able to see like all the modules, what do we teach in those modules, and join us for the masterclass. But also, I was just telling Rami that inshallah, I would love to partner with Oaktree to try to bring some of these trainings to, leadership all around the country, to different communities and all the organizations that are serving us, mashallah, and doing some beautiful work to try to bring this to that space as well, inshallah.
I love it. And for parents out there, I think it's super important. Define 360 is more as a resource for parents working with their youth on their emotional intelligence and
Yeah.
mindfulness. Is that correct?
Yeah, define360.online is for parents and teachers to sign up for courses and programs and our character coach class, or request a kids programming for a community. And then for the adults training, just on mindfulness, you go to Productive Muslim. Those are the two main platforms I'm using right now. We have a corporate brand. We're slowly kind of working. I'm trained on a Google born. There was a program that Google engineers developed to make employees more productive, focus, grow their empathy and well-being, and that became so successful. We went to 50 countries, 150 cities. I think I'm the first certified coach for that program in Dallas, so I try to bring that to Dallas. So I'm active in that space a little bit as well. But my passion as a Muslim, I just feel alive when I see the Prophet ﷺ, he was always reflecting, da'iman fikr, like he was always in that fikr and reflection, and he was silent for so long, and he was reflecting, and he was so mindful in the way that he spoke. He talked so brief but so wise, and all of these different qualities don't come without some training, right? And so I feel like some of these trainings we're doing can actually fuel that prophetic character. So that inspiration and that it definitely kind of makes me come alive. Yeah.
MashaAllah. May Allah reward you, Brother Wadud, and really appreciate you having on. And we hope and pray that people can use your resources, use you as a benefit for themselves, their children, their organizations, inshallah ta'ala, in our community. We ask Allah to bless you and continue the amazing work that you're doing. With that said, I really want to thank everybody that's been listening. We hope and pray that this episode was beneficial. It was tremendously beneficial for myself. And inshallah ta'ala, we hope and to speak to you soon with our next guest on our next episodes. Brother Wadud, jazakallah khairan. Barakallah feekum.
Jazakallah khair. May Allah bless you. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, everyone.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody.